Hi, today I'd like to talk about the Barbarian and Demon Hunter's passives, Ruthless and Ambush, how much damage they actually do, and potentially some alternatives. Now, what both of these skills have in common is that they give you 40% additional multiplicative damage when the enemies are in a certain HP range. So to find out how much damage this actually is, I just took the assumption that your average amount of damage, let's say this is a really high level push, your average amount of damage to a particular mob is 1% of its health. So it has 10,000 health and you're doing 1% of that 100 damage per attack with no other multipliers. So you do 140 if you're in that bonus damage range, and you do 100 when you're not in that bonus damage range. And how long does it take to kill that? Now, crits, area damage procs, and anything else that might come up RNG-wise are going to make this be much different numbers in actual combat, but this would be what it would average out to over time. So I slid this down so that row 11 is after one attack. So that means we just subtract 10 from the final attack, and that'll be how many attacks it took. So this is one attack, two attacks, three attacks, etc. Scroll down. When we get them down to 3,000, we're still only doing 100 because they're not below 30% yet. It's that the passive says below 30%. So after one more attack, now we do 140. Boom, 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 boom. And they are dead after 92 attacks, and the last one was a little bit of overkill. So it took us approximately 91.7 attacks on average to get the enemy down to 0 HP, which means that we saved basically 8.3 attacks out of 100. So I was trying to figure out what that bonus DPS is, and I came up with this formula: 1 over number of hits with your bonus divided by the number of hits it would have taken without the bonus. So in this case, 91.7 over 100, and then 1 divided by that total. Or I think I did 917 over 1,000 instead. It's the same thing. And I came up with about 9.1% bonus DPS. This is what you gain from picking up Ruthless on average. It doesn't really help on the boss, so you might say like, well, Brawler's not going to be up on the boss. Berserker Rage, depending on your build, might not be up on the boss, but it also might be. Ruthless definitely is up on the boss. Well, that might be fine and good if you're speed farming, but if you're pushing, that last 25% is such a small portion of the boss fight that I still don't think you should factor that in. You know, just something to kill the boss a little bit faster. You don't need it. Stricken kills the boss. None of your other multipliers matter that much at all. All right, so here we have some other options, or maybe you just can take all the above if you're on softcore, but we've got Rampage is multiplicative, woo, but it's really hard to actually get the max benefit out of it because it relies on killing 25 enemies, and while you're pushing, it's hard to kill enemies. I really like Rampage on Whirlwind with COE because you can grab enemies over and over, just like maybe weaken them on the physical as you're traveling, but trying to gather multiple screens together. And you could probably have 50, 100 enemies in one spot really quickly, really easily. And then you really focus on dealing damage. And all that time that you're gathering, you're not benefiting from Rampage. And when you start trying to DPS, you're not benefiting from Rampage. But when you start DPSing, you also have all this area damage that's really easy to take advantage of. But anyway, once you do blow up the few weakest enemies, you get your bloodbath going, you get your Oculus going, and you line that up with a COE physical, and man, it is really easy to get to 25 kills all of a sudden. And then when you already have that 25% additional multiplier, in addition to like Oculus has come easy because everything in the area is weaker, and bloodbaths come easier, and like once you start getting kills, it's really easy to sustain kills. So I think Rampage works really well with Whirlwind as a multiplier, but if you're in situations where it's hard to get to 25 or to sustain it, I would not take that. Berserker Rage and Brawler are both additive. Some additive multipliers that this goes into the same category are your Taeguk if you're doing Whirlwind. It's the only legendary gem that's additive. Or your skill damage on your gear. Or if you're a Frenzy Barb, then your Falter, which is what I believe most people use, counts as the same category. So by additive in the same category, I mean this doesn't give you a 25% multiplier. It gives you 25 more multiplier to your already 60 or 80%, depending on your level of Taeguk. Assuming it's between 100 and 150, it'd be 60 to 80% when it's maxed. Let's say 60 on a 100. So that makes your additive multipliers 60, and then you get your 2 rend rolls on your gear. Now it's 90, and so you're going from 190% increased by skills damage to 220 or 215. So almost half of the benefit is gone. Berserker Rage is now doing like 12% or so, maybe 13. But yeah, still better than 9.1. And Brawler is 20%. It wouldn't be up on the boss, but like I was saying, boss dice is stricken, so it doesn't really matter. The thing about these is if you're not capped on Fury most of the time, you definitely don't want to take Berserker Rage. And if you're not, for some reason, fighting more than 3 enemies at a time, I don't know of any build that really stays away from fighting more than 3 enemies at a time. Even when I Frenzy or Impale push, I always like to have a lot of things around for more Oculuses. This is up all the time until the boss, basically. So I was saying before, Ruthless is basically a 9.1% damage bonus. As far as your additive damage goes, 20 divided by 217 is about 9.2% bonus to your damage, which means that if you have 117% additive damage in that category, so 117 between Taeguk, gear, and anything else that falls into that category, as long as it's 117 or lower, it's still better to pick up Brawler than Ruthless, but that's assuming that you keep Brawler up the whole time. On the other hand, Berserker Rage with its 25% is actually better all the way until 172 additive damage. So I actually, when I saw this, on my Whirlwind that I'm pushing with this season, I swapped it from Ruthless to Berserker Rage because that is quite a bit more damage. And then lastly, I just did the math. If you weren't using Falter or Taeguk, then these 25%, and then in addition to that, the 20% multipliers give you 19.2 and 12.9% more damage when you pick them up. It's going to be a lot less than that if you're doing Falter on Frenzy, so no real builds really come to mind that would get this kind of rewards. But even with the Falter factored in on Frenzy, you're still going from 1.8 to 2.05 to 2.25, which that looks really similar to 10% more damage, getting 20 when you have 200. It's going to be almost 10% additional damage, which is still quite a bit better than just 9.1. All right, so doing the same thing with Ambush, where you do 40% more damage as long as the enemy is above 75% HP. We're going to start off by hurting them for 140 because they start off at max HP. And when they get down to 7,500, which is 3/4 HP, then we'll only be hurting them by 100. After they get down to 7,480, the next attack only hurts them for 100, and they do that all the way until they reach 0, or in this case, we overkilled them by 20 HP. This was the 93rd attack, and it was a little extra, so we're assuming 92.8 total attacks on average with Ruthless in a situation where it normally takes you 100 attacks. So we saved 7.2 attacks, take 1 over the hits with the bonus, divide by the hits without the bonus, and you get 7.8% approximately bonus DPS. Okay, so some other passive options to consider. Call of the Week, which maybe I shouldn't even call an option because pretty much everybody runs this. This season I'm actually not. I'm dropping Trapped from my push build and just going no Call of the Week. For a little bit, I tried going Thrill of the Hunt to make sure it's always procced, but I just actually like dropping it entirely, and then things can chase me easier. So I think for bigger pulls faster, I actually prefer going without Thrill of the Hunt and no slows and no Call of the Week. But if you've got Trapped and you're using Trapped anyway, then definitely go Call of the Week, and that's 99% builds. Steady Aim. So this is another 20% multiplier, which is way better than 7.8, but way harder to have active. So it's only up if you have no enemies within a certain distance of you. Maybe you actually do keep enemies at a distance most of the time, but if you have an Oculus show up next to them, or the best damage you can do is in the middle of a pack of stuff, then it's going to be down when you need it the most. So Steady Aim, really good multiplier, but really hard to have up for maximum efficiency. So if this is up half the time while you're dealing damage, like if it's up while you're dealing half of your damage, then it would be better than Ambush because that would be a 10% average multiplier. If it's not, then obviously forget about it. Archery. So this if you're wearing a hand crossbow, boosts your crit chance. I think a regular crossbow, it boosts your crit damage. It's possible for those situations to give you more than 7.7% sheet DPS, and that will factor into actual DPS as long as you don't have something crazy going on with your build. Like maybe if you threw in wind chill, then that wouldn't be factored into your sheet until it would be factored on mob by mob basis, and your sheet would be a lie basically. So anything that changes the crit dynamically in battle or by enemy, you can't trust this. But that's not most builds. Most builds, you can trust your sheet when it comes to your crits and how much they affect your damage. So if you throw on archery and your sheet damage bumps up a lot, maybe you're putting a crossbow in each hand, and so you have a lot of crit damage but not a lot of crit chance, this can actually be better than ambush. Sharpshooter. I always thought this was a joke. If you've critted, then you lose the benefit. But if you don't crit, then you get increasing 4% crit chance all the time. Well, it turns out that you always have that 4%. I checked it out in game. I had, I think it was, let's say 52% before Sharpshooter, and I threw on Sharpshooter, and every time it reset, it only went down to 56%. So it's a baseline 4% increase, which is almost as good as archery. And occasionally, it's going to go up to 8%. Hopefully, you're attacking often enough that it never gets higher than that. But even if it's at 8%, more than a quarter of the time, then that's better than archery. I don't think GOD is a build to really benefit from this, but if you had something where you actually weren't attacking constantly while you're moving, then when you get to a new location, you can have more DPS. Unfortunately, the only other favorite push build of mine that comes to mind is Impale, and when you get to a new location with Impale, your Endless Walk gives you basically no damage. That cuts your damage in half, so even if you have an extra 10 crit chance, it's not going to really mean anything. But yeah, it's a potential for more than 4% crit chance, but always at least 4% crit chance. And when you do get it higher, this is the thing that was new to me, is I never really read, it lasts for 1 second after you crit. So that means if you have 100, you show up, I wouldn't recommend this strategy, but if you went to town, showed back up on your COE element, you would have 1 second of guaranteed crits. So you could just make a really crazy build where you stack crit damage and not crit chance, and then just do damage once every 16 seconds. Sounds dumb. You'd be better off with just a normal amount of crit chance and doing damage for the entire 4 seconds of your element, but it's just a thought. So single out, this is 25% bonus damage if the enemy is 20 yards away from any other enemy. That's really hard to come by. That's basically a single target boss only buff, which is, in my opinion, a terrible idea for a buff. Because just like on the Barb, bosses are supposed to die to Stricken. If you were doing N6, M4 and not running Stricken, sure, maybe take this. I feel like we didn't even take it then, though. Like there was something else that gave you a better multiplier to get to the boss faster. So you always just pick other things that get you to the boss faster rather than trying to kill the boss faster, especially on Stricken builds where you need to just stay with the boss as long as possible to stack that Stricken. You could get there with double damage. It won't cut the time in half. And in this case, it's far less than double damage. So 25% crit chance, assuming you're not already taking other crit chance things that add to crit chance. Demon Hunter often runs Quiver, but even if they don't, you can get to a pretty decent number on your gear without a Quiver. So this 25% actually isn't that huge of a deal. It's a lot of damage. I would take 25% if it was easier to come by, but it's just not useful enough for me to ever take it. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about some defensive passive options. Now, for me, I like to play the same way when I'm at 800 Paragon or 3K Paragon. And in order to do that, in order to have enough toughness to survive everything that I want to be fighting, I need to pick up a lot more defensive passives, possibly legendary gems early, possibly throwing Paragon into Vitality, all of it early, and then later swapping those things out for more offense. But really, you could take every defensive passive choice, not really lose too many tiers, but have a so much easier time actually dealing damage that you actually can do a higher tier, depending on your build, than if you picked offensive passives. So I think they're definitely worth picking up. The first one, I always take this whether I'm on hardcore or softcore, is the Cheat Death. On Demon Hunter, it's awareness. It allows you to screw up once a minute with no consequences. So that's the way I think of it. is that if you take a charge you didn't want to take, or Dark Berserker smashes you, you're still fine, as long as you don't do it twice in the same minute. So even on softcore, I always take cheat deaths. Numbing Traps is 25% damage reduction if you proc it. I don't honestly know what the rules are on this. I just know everybody uses it if they're on Shadow Impale, and I've seen people using it on God. I've heard that even though it doesn't slow enemies, that the Hungering Arrow counts as or Devouring Arrow counts as a chill, so maybe that's what does it, but I don't actually do it because I don't know why it works with God. So I just go Perfectionist if I need to pick up some defense on God myself. This is a much better multiplier. Perfectionist, it's 10% all res and 10% armor, but it is probably 15 to 20% overall as a defensive toughness multiplier, last I checked. So Numbing Traps is definitely better. On the barb side of things, we got Nerves of Steel, which is their cheat death. Superstition, it's non-physical damage reduction, which means that if you happen to be in Lakuni slashers or on a physical boss, it's not doing you any good, which is a little bit of a problem unless you just stacked a little extra physical res on your gear. I'm trying to work through that on my pantsless barb pushes recently because I didn't stack any extra physical res on my gear. It just never really showed up. With no pants, I'm definitely picking this up to boost my defense a bit, and it's helping against all those other resistances, but not phys res. Tough as Nails gives you thorns damage, but also gives you 25% more armor. Armor is useful versus physical and non-physical, but since you already have 25% armor in your Paragon, that puts your total at 125 before you add this in, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be additive with that, which means it's actually only 20% more armor. It's probably a little bit worse than plus 20% more. And if you're using Stone Gauntlets, that probably adds into that giant pool at that point, so definitely don't take it. But there was one time in the past, I think it was like really early hardcore, where I took Tough as Nails and Superstition to try and get more damage reduction really early for my pushes. Relentless is 50% damage reduction, but when you're below 35% HP. So if something like a Dark Berserker smashes you, Mallet Lord smashes you, something charges you, that will often take you from 50 or more to 0, and this did nothing. Whereas the armor would have helped. A big, powerful Molten Explosion goes off. Then Superstition, I think Molten probably is an element. It's got to be fire, right? Because the fire immunity. Anyway, those things would help. Relentless would not. But if you are very slowly taking damage, let's say every second you're taking 10%, but you've got enough recovery to heal 5%, you're going down by a total of 5% a second in some situation, and then you get below 35%, suddenly you're only going down by 5% and going back up by 5%, and you can sustain. So if you've got some build that is very slowly and gradually losing health, like that exists in the game, but theoretically, it would be really good with this passive. Well, that'll do it for me. I'm going to go ahead and put this spreadsheet down in the video description. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you like the video and want to see more. And if you have any thoughts on it, go ahead and leave them in the comments, and I will read them. Thank you.